My name is Ruth Bennett. I'm an accredited coach with 3D Coaching, and I take the lead on our 3D youth coaching program. Just to give you a bit of an idea about me, I was a youth worker for 18 years, a full-time youth worker, and I still volunteer in my local youth work project. And I'm here with my colleague, Claire. Claire, can you say hello?
I can, yes. Hello, I'm Clare. And I also work with 3D. And my background is I've worked with young people for a long, long time. And more recently, I've been a careers advisor for the last few years, using a coaching approach when I can.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. So together, Claire and I are developing a youth coaching stream for 3D coaching. I don't know how many of you know much about 3D coaching, but we've been going over 20 years, helping people have better conversations. And what we want to do is we want to focus on helping young people have great conversations and take responsibility for their own decisions, rather than expecting adults to take responsibility for them and their own sort of life choices. So just so you know, let me repeat myself, this session is being recorded, and because there are so many of us and to keep a bit of anonymity, I've asked you to just be on mute and to turn the video off so that we can use this recording in other places and other times. You are more than welcome to use the chat feature. Probably at the bottom of your screen you'll see a chat pop up. You can do a chat pop-up window and you can type in a message or a thought, a comment, a question, and Claire will be looking at those, and we'll have a moment a bit later on for some reflections and thoughts, and we'll use some of our thoughts. So do feel free to do that as you go along. It might be that you want to have a pen and piece of paper by the side of you as well to chuck anything down, just anything down you're thinking. We will make sure we're finished by 7:45. So that is our end point. So let's make a start. Just to say, we're a really broad group of people here today. Some of us have trained in coaching skills, some people haven't. Some of us are parents, some of us are teachers, some are medical professionals, some are youth workers, and some of us wear lots of those different hats. In whatever context we share time with young people, and wherever we're coming from, it can be really useful for us to have a reminder about how to have the most effective conversations with young people. And that's what we're going to do today. So let's start by thinking, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to remind ourselves of some of the essential components of having a great conversation. Whether or not the young person is our child, maybe they're our students, or they've got some other kind of relationship to us, we'll think about how to engage young people in great conversations. What we think about today may not necessarily be new information, but hopefully it will surface some new thoughts and insights so that we can do what we do day to day better. So do feel free to scribble anything down that you want to as we go along. How are we going to do this? Well, we're going to be thinking about where we need to focus in our conversations. We're going to remind ourselves of some coaching principles that might help us engage and to think about what we'd like to do next. And how will we know we've done it? Well, our hope is that we will all walk away with one thought or tweak maybe that we can try to use in our conversations with young people in the coming week or so that we can ponder things as we go about our life and our kind of everyday. So if we're ready, then let's make a start. I wonder if you've ever tried to help your teenager think through a problem and they've just got mad with you because you're interfering. Or whether you've wanted your student at school to understand the need to complete the questions in full, or whether you've been ambushed by questions at the most inopportune moment. Talking to a teenager, we know, can be exhausting and frustrating. Emotions can escalate from 0 to 90 miles an hour in a nanosecond. So how do we take the heat out of the situation? How do we step back and look at things in a different way? I wonder whether there's something about what we focus on. Often in life, we focus on what we want out of a conversation. For example, I want to know how my son's day went without just the more than the regular kind of grunts that I get. Or I want my young person to feed back what they want out of the youth group this year. Or maybe I want my student to tell me what he needs from me to complete the coursework. As an adult, I'm trying my best to be clear, to instill goals and direction for the young person. And that's good, right? Well, I wonder what would happen if we used a coaching approach to focus on things slightly differently. Rather than focusing on what I want out of the conversation, I wonder what would happen if we concentrate on hearing them and what they want. Sometimes it's good to remind ourselves that young people are in this process, this change from being a child to a brave new world of adulthood. That means that they need to renegotiate their understanding of who has control and responsibility for decisions and their life. If you can imagine that it's a bit like a continuum, so a bit like this white line, there's a continuum of who's in control. As a teenager, I'm moving along the continuum from a time when I was a baby and adults made all the choices for me. Adults have all the control, to a place where I'm a grown-up and I'm making the decisions and I'm taking control of things myself. And we're moving along this continuum. As a child, my parent or the adult fixes problems for me and challenges. As an adult, when I've grown up, I take responsibility for my own challenges and I'm capable of doing that. I am an adult. We know, don't we, that this transition phase is tough. As adults, our role is to help, to accompany our young people along this journey, helping them to learn how to move to the place where they are taking responsibility for themselves and their own choices, their own lives, to a place where I make the choices for myself. We often talk about, at 3D, about the need to share responsibility within coaching. A coach is there to support a person to make their own decisions, not make the decisions for them. And together we hold the process. The coach and the thinker holds the process together. They share the responsibility. So we can have conversations with young people like this as well, where we're sharing responsibility for the conversation and the process. And the other person is in control of the focus of the content. So the young person is in control of the focus, the content, and we are sharing the responsibility for the process. And I am helping them think that through. So questions we might want to consider when we're having a coaching style conversation with a young person might include: who decides what a good outcome is? Who is in control of the outcome? Who sets the pace of the conversation? Who else needs to be present? If I, as the adult, decide the content, the pace, the outcome of the conversation, I can't expect a young person to want to take any action. The actions are mine, not theirs. The actions need to belong to the person they need to belong to. Claire, I wonder if you could illustrate this for us with a story.
Certainly. I'm now on. Can people see me okay? Is that all right, Ruth? Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to tell you a bit of a story about when I was, this real life story, it really happened. I was on the way to school, to my son's school with him, He was in the car, and as we were driving along, he told me he was off to a careers fair, a kind of an HE convention that day, and that he hadn't actually given it that much thought. And he said he thought he probably would just have a wander around, collect as much merch as he could, and do the research later. So I said, well, we've got this journey time to school. That's about 10 minutes. And did he want to have a bit of a think about this day ahead? He agreed. So we knew we had a fixed time, we had 10 minutes. And then we tried to establish what it was he wanted to actually talk about. And he said it was something that he wanted to know how he could make the session more useful, how this session he was going to could be more useful to him. So I just said to him, well, what do you think needs to be different by the time we get to school? And he found that question a bit harder to answer. And he said, well, actually, he thought he wanted to be a bit clearer about how he would spend that time and maybe who he needed to talk to, what people he needed to talk to while he was there. And he actually indicated he thought actually that could be really useful, and to narrow down perhaps the number of universities rather than just going around everyone, maybe narrow down a little bit as well. So I then asked a few more questions that were open. He didn't have to give me eye contact. I was looking at the road, as you can imagine, I wasn't looking at him. So we just talked and drove. And by the time we got to school, I said, so where are we now? Are you clear? Have you got what you needed? And he said, yes, he was clear. And he was planning on going to the show. He was going to start by talking to a few universities about studying history. So it sounded like he'd got to where he needed to get to. He got out of the car, went to school. He wandered home at the end of the day. And I said, so how was it? Did you get what you needed? And he said, yeah, he did. He had a really good day. He was much clearer. He didn't want to study history. And actually, he was now thinking he actually wanted to study international relations maybe, and certainly explore that in a lot more detail. And then he showed me the vast array of pens that he'd acquired in his travels around the convention. So I then reflected a bit on that conversation and how that had gone. Now, my background, as I said, is in careers. So I've run and stood up in front of hundreds of students and given them a kind of top 10 on how to get the best out of an HE convention. And it would have been so easy for me if we think about that picture where Ruth showed us in slide 3 of that continuum. I could have easily just told him as a parent what to do. You're going in 10 minutes time, you're going to be there. This is what you need to do. I could have told him that, but actually I just held my tongue and got him to think about what he thought he wanted to do. And together, in that we space, we together talked about it and came to the point where he then had a plan. But not only had he had a plan, actually, if we reflect on the whole conversation, he actually got a lot further in that day than he thought he was going to. He thought he was going to go and initially just collect prospectuses and do research later. Then he thought he was going to speak to somebody about history. But actually, if you think where he got to at the end, he was much clearer about what his next step was going to be. Okay.
Thank you. It's amazing what happens, isn't it, when we share the responsibility, when we resist that urge, that human urge to tell somebody what to do, because let's face it, we all want to do that. We all know what's best. But when we hold that back and we share responsibility and we allow people to be in control of their own lives and their own choices, that's when the transformation happens. I'd love to share with you some of what we're learning at 3D Youth at the moment about having great conversations with teenagers. And one of the first things we've been thinking about, Claire and I, is how useful the 3D principles are. If you don't know about them, 3D coaching have sort of distilled a whole load of language of coaching into 16 principles, great, really simple, pithy principles, and how to have a great conversation. And we've looked at 4 of those, and I just want to briefly share those with you now and sort of say We think this is really useful. These 4 are really useful in conversations with young people. There's something about moving and doing something together that helps us think, that helps the conversation flow. Have you ever found out have you ever found out more about your toddler's day when you're doing the bedtime routine than you have previously? Or maybe the questions flow as you're walking your junior to school. Or that a trip to the cinema seems to elicit the ponderings of the meaning of life in your teenager. So why don't we plan to move as we talk? Go for a walk, play a game, stand up, do some stretching. There's something about moving the body, isn't there, that helps to move the brain. And there's something about being alongside someone that's far less intense than it is when we are face to face with them. Moving and doing something together can really elicit thinking in a way that sitting, staring each other out, is just so alien and so difficult, particularly for teenagers. The next principle that I've been thinking about is changing hats. There are times when we need to have a different kind of conversation, that it's not one where we can share responsibility and make a decision together. Perhaps we need to tell our child what we need them to do, or we've got information about where they can find out about a particular career or something they're interested in. Knowing when we're changing hats and having a different kind of conversation is really useful. And if you're anything like me, you sometimes try and offer a fake choice. Have you ever done that with your children? Or it can be a really useful parenting tool. Would you like to walk upstairs, or shall I carry you? Often we just need to be straight with people. When they don't have a choice, we need to be clear about that. If my boss needs me to do something, I really don't want her to try and persuade me to do it, or for her to nudge me towards really wanting to make that decision. I want her to just tell me up front that that's what she needs me to do. It's clear and it's honest. Let's be honest, young people can sniff duplicity a mile off. If we want them to trust us, which I suggest we do, then transparency and honesty is key. Do it now. If a young person asks to talk, let's talk. Let's face it, they don't always ask at the best moments. Maybe when we're walking out the door, or telling them it's time for bed, or we're in the middle of doing something else, cooking dinner, doing the washing, whatever it is. So how can we make the most of the opportunity in the moment and still respect our own needs, my own needs? Well, I wonder if it's about what we focus on. I wonder if it's about focusing on listening. If someone wants to talk, I would suggest the thing they most often want is to be heard. Even if we haven't got time to go into a whole conversation, spending time to hear somebody for even 5 minutes is usually possible. I wonder what would happen if the next time our young person wants to talk at the most inconvenient time, we were able to just stop for a few minutes, listen to what they say, reflect back the headline of what we're hearing, and together decide what needs to happen next. I wonder what would happen. Coaching is a conversation where someone feels heard and knows something at the end of the conversation that they didn't know at the beginning. If we can help a young person feel really heard in the moment and agree the next step, we could transform those annoying, awkward moments into golden moments where we've given our young person the gift of really feeling heard. Let's remember, and yes, I'm talking to myself as well, great conversations don't need to take a long time. A few moments might be just enough. Do it now. Change the medium. If you've done any kind of coaching training with 3D, you'll know how powerful it is to use a different medium to help us think, to use a medium that's more than the spoken word. As an adult, this can feel a little bit alien, to do some drawing or playing with things. But for young people, it's a bit of a no-brainer. They know that's how they think. Encouraging a teenager to draw, scribble, walk something out, fiddle with Play-Doh, or stand on a chair to see something from a different perspective doesn't feel that weird, and it can really unlock something profound. I had a fantastic conversation last night with my 15-year-old. She saw my coaching bag with a big stack of IKEA placemats in it, and she said, "What on earth are they, Mum?" Well, I told her I use them for coaching and asked if she wanted me to show her. Sure, she said. So I gave her one and I said, when you've finished your GCSEs, which she's taking this year, what are your options of what next? She thought about it, told me the obvious one, and I motioned for her to pop that mat on the floor. And then I handed her another one. She came up with as many different options as she could think of, placing a mat for each one and a spare one for those we hadn't even thought of yet. Then I invited her to stand on each one in turn and asked her to think about how it felt. In the briefest of demonstrations, something was unlocked in her head. After months of her worrying and agonising about what she was going to do next year when she'd finished her GCSEs, she suddenly had a clear idea about what might be the best option for her. She beamed and she said, "Yeah, I get it." It's a daft example, but in those 5 minutes, something was unlocked because we used a different medium. I'd had a huge amount of conversations with her about it where nothing changed. Using a different medium unlocked something. Instead of describing something to her, she experienced it, she felt it, and she could understand the power. Words are overrated. Changing the medium can unlock stuckness really quickly. Let's try it. I want to leave some time for thoughts and questions and comments in a minute. But before I do, I want to remind us that if we want to have a conversation using a coaching approach, it's really useful to know before we start what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and how we'll know we've done it before we start. If you've done any kind of training with 3D, that's what we're establishing when we ask the Stoker's questions. We're agreeing the boundaries of our conversation so that we're all clear. So where are we right now in our time together this evening? Well, we've talked about making sure that we're focusing on the conversation on the right thing, on what the young person wants the conversation to be, rather than just what I want out of it. We've reminded ourselves that young people are learning to let go of adults being in control, to moving to a place where they have the control about their own lives and their own decisions. And we've got, as adults, a significant role in helping support them, accompanying them on that journey. And we've thought about 4 of 3D coaching's principles to help us offer some easy ways to think through how we can approach these conversations. Move. Do it now. Changing the medium. Changing hats with consent. And we've reminded ourselves to establish what we're doing, how we're going to do it, and how we'll know we've done it before we start. So I wonder what you're thinking. What are your thoughts and reflections? What are the thoughts and reflections you're having about having great conversations with young people? I want to invite you to take a moment now to bring up the chat box and to type in any thoughts or questions, and we'll share a few of those as we go. And Claire will offer some of those to us so that we don't have to turn microphones back on. Claire, if you could, as and when things come in, if you could feed us a few of those thoughts and questions. We'll take a moment though to allow people to have a think and to write what they are thinking in that box. So maybe 30 seconds to do that. Thank you.
Okay, Claire, so sorry, Ruth, so if the questions that come in are things around, so when a teenager just doesn't want to open up, doesn't want to talk about stuff, the doors are closed, what do we do then?
What do we do when the doors are closed?
Yeah,
it's tough. There's something about timing,
yeah,
there, I think.
And readiness, I think, isn't it? Timing and readiness.
Yeah. To have a conversation where you're going to share responsibility, you have to be in a place that where you want to have that conversation, where you want to do that thinking. And I think yes, young people need to be ready. And I'm a real believer in spending what feels like useless time with a young person. So building relationship and building those moments. So one of the things that a friend suggested maybe a year ago I do with my children, I've got 2 children, and he suggested that I take one of them out for a coffee date each month. And I alternate it. 1 month I take my son, 1 month I take my daughter. And for no reason other than just to build relationship. And I thought at the time, that just seems mad. I spend time with them. It's not a big issue. But actually doing that has really made a big difference. We don't necessarily have the deep conversations in those coffee dates, but what it's doing is it's building our relationship. It's saying you matter, and I'm really building my relationship so that when they need to have those conversations, they know there's a safe space to do it. And I mean, that's just something for me that's been really useful. But I think there's an important point there about having fun, about giving time. It's the old adage, isn't it? Kids spell time, kids spell love, T-I-M-E.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Another question that's come in are, how do you take the heat out of it? A lot of conversations get contentious quick. And how do we manage contentious conversations?
Yeah.
We've all had them.
We have, haven't we? And there's something about, I think, letting our brain blow off a bit of steam and allowing somebody to say what they really want to say. And not trying to stop them. Gosh, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking how hard this is. But as the primitive part of our brain is kind of vying for that kind of fighting moment, it's kind of like a content little child that has to just let off its steam and kind of get its temper tantrum out there before the logical part of the brain can kick in. And so actually, I think to take the heat out, sometimes we've got to allow the kind of the emotion out in a safe way before we can then take it on to having a useful conversation. Does that make sense, Claire?
It does. There are some really fantastic comments coming in that I hope people can read. I think it's given a lot of food for thought around using things like using the mats. Someone's putting out there around using them as an alternative way to have a conversation. I think that's really interesting. And another question was, so when young people aren't up for discussing things, we had a bit of a conversation about this, didn't we, beforehand, when people don't really want to talk, what we do next.
Yeah, and you had some quite good thoughts on that, Claire.
Yeah, we just thought that actually the whole changing the medium is really, really important. I just think actually about many a conversation I had on reflection in my work context, where the expectation was it would be a sit-down kind of conversation, and I had young people who were really stuck and didn't know what to do next. And I think, on reflection, if we'd moved and we'd done something different, not talked, I think talking was so hard. The other thing I found quite useful, quite often people don't want to talk, was give a few options. I used, in my role, quite often use the computer as an information source, which ends up as like a third person in the conversation. Sometimes that is quite useful because it detracts away from the kind of, it's a shared experience. We're doing something shared. We're both looking at this information together. I can then do some picking out of some bits and have some more facilitating type questions in the talking. And the young person not looking at me, they're looking at the screen. And that again just takes some of that, something out of the intensity of what is quite a
changes your position.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. I also always give them the mouse, always give them control of the keyboard, because by doing that, they might often come to us thinking we're the experts, we're the ones that know. They want to be told. By just that simple act of giving them the computer, them the keyboard, you know, this is the website, can you find it? Believe you me, they can do it quicker than me anyway, so why not? So give them the medium, and when it comes to sort of working out what next, if they need to write something down, give them the pen, give them the thing, give them the tools. Don't make that bit about us at all. Enable them to do the next bit. So use those mediums to help them take that responsibility.
That's very clear. Thank you.
Let's just see.
Thoughts or reflections for us to consider, Claire?
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions when a parent take over the decision making for a younger person whilst you're trying to empower them? Do you have any suggestions when the parents take over? Do you mean, I think this is a question from Jilly. I think maybe you mean, how do we stop ourselves? Jilly, do you want to just say, is that what you mean? How do we stop ourselves from doing that, taking over? Jilly wants to type in the box.
How do we stop ourselves taking over the decision making for the young person whilst trying to empower them? Yeah, I can see the challenge of that. And I think there's a lot of it is trial and error, isn't it? If we're talking about our children,
yeah.
Oh, hang on, when parents take over the decision making. Well, if I'm talking about my children, oh no, I'm a tutor and the parents take over.
Oh, I see. Okay, right. I wonder if there's something about contracting a bit more at the start of the conversation. I quite often used to have conversations where a parent was present in a conversation I was having. I made the boundaries very clear at the start, who I was talking with, and I would welcome some input perhaps at the end, but actually initially the focus was going to be between me and them. So actually I did make in the contract at the very start of the conversation, I made those boundaries quite clear so that everyone was clear that wouldn't happen. If the young person's really struggling to say something, I would then say to the young person, do you want your parent to say something? Do you want them to chip in and say a bit of something? Again, it just helps the young person feel they have got the control of the conversation. I don't know whether you want to say anything about that, Ruth.
Yeah, and it just making me think about how quickly we jump into silence. And I think as a parent, that's even easier to jump into the silence, isn't it? And
I see what you're saying, as in we try and fill the silence, you mean?
Yeah, as a parent, trying to jump into the silence and answer for my child in front of the tutor or teacher or whatever. And I think it just reminds me the importance of allowing the silence to be. And in my position, Jilly, as a tutor, I suppose I might be actually honestly saying to the parent, should we just let so-and-so just have a moment to think about what they're saying, and just being really upfront with them. And if they're struggling with that in that moment, then maybe having a conversation outside of the time, say, I think we need to give your child more space to answer, because we can't always answer things immediately.
Yeah, and I think that's very much what Annette's added, is that yeah, sometimes we just need to hold back. Actually, thinking takes some time, and to respond takes some time. And that's why perhaps sometimes change the medium, having some fiddle things around, Play-Doh, something on the table that actually might be useful, just to have, you know, as another thing there, or a doodle pad or something like that when that thinking's happening. It almost gives permission for thinking to happen rather than an immediate response.
Yeah. And I suppose there's something about, as the tutor or teacher, sort of directing my questions straight to the child and kind of focusing on them and not ignoring the parent, but kind of making sure that's where my attention is, that is sending a message to the parent that I want to hear this person's view that might be interesting.
Somebody else has put in here that just in this half an hour, someone's noticed that actually these principles could be useful just in our general family relationships, husbands and wives, and so more than just, you know, with young people. It gives us a chance to think, doesn't it, about how perhaps we could, all of our conversations could be transformed a little bit more if we perhaps approach them in these ways.
I wonder, Claire, whether just in the last minute or two on this, like, whether there's one or two other just comments without them being questions, just comments worth sharing back, if you can quickly enough scroll down them.
Yeah. We've started having our two boys take turns helping as chefs in an evening, and good chats emerge while chopping, making. Really excellent thoughts there. Thanks for the ideas, particularly the ones about different mediums. The maps are good. I bet there are lots of other ideas I could find them on, you know, find different ideas of other medium we can use.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's relevant for many people, not just teens. I think as a parent, I often want to fix. We talked a bit about that, didn't we, Ruth, when we were preparing, how easy it is to fall into fix-it mode, really, when we do just want to fix things quick and take that responsibility. And we don't realise often that we are taking that responsibility away, but it's very easy just to try and fix because it's quicker. Well, it feels like it's quicker, doesn't it?
Yes. It's quicker, but there's less engagement.
And less learning, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm wondering what next. I said we'll finish at 7:45, and I'm determined to do that. So if you think a little bit of training would help you embed this way of working for you, your family or your team or whatever context that's in, then do talk to us. If you know a young person who would really value a conversation with a coach trained in this way of thinking, then talk to us. If it's something that you can offer a young person, fantastic, talk to them. Of course, the hardest place, I think, to do any of this is at home.
Absolutely.
With your own. And that's the value, isn't it, of having a safe other that they can talk to. You probably already know, if you're a parent, who that safe other is and where that safe other is. If not, I wonder whether it's worth you just thinking about that. Where can your children go to get that space to have those conversations? As we close, I just want to give you a moment to think about maybe one thing, one tweak that you can make to your own conversations in the next week that you can try. And maybe let's take the chat box again and just type a couple of words, 1 word, 2 words, about what tweak would you like to make in your conversations with your young people this week. And as you write them, we'll just read some of them out so we can finish on some positive news of what we would like to do together to help our teenagers have better conversations. Let's just type them in now. So Annette would like to work to her son's schedules rather than her own as much as possible. Rescheduling could result in losing the opportunities. Yeah, thanks, Annette. use the mats to constellate, as I do with my clients. Yeah, using the things that we do with our clients, absolutely. I think the most important takeaway for me is to make the use of whatever opportunities present to have a meaningful conversation and to be present more. Separate places, mats for embodying choices. That's what Richard's going to try.
To be present and listen, that's what Gilly's going to go for.
Yeah. Using opportunities to do things together, moving together. Brilliant. Respecting their decisions. Yeah.
Stop trying to fix. Yeah.
Trying to fix everything. Yeah, you're right. That's disempowering. Yeah. Stop trying to fix everything. Brilliant. Guys, thank you so much for being with us this evening. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to be in touch, then our email addresses are on the screen, or look us up on the website. Do be in touch. I'd love to hear how you get on with things. And if you want any more information about either learning to use this style, this way of thinking and embedding that, or about having a conversation, us having a conversation with a particular young person, then do please get in touch. Thanks ever so much for your contribution. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Brilliant. Good night.
Everyone.
Good luck. Bye.
Bye.